The National Electrical Code Section 430.102 generally requires a disconnect within sight of a motor controller. This requirement aims to provide a readily accessible means of disconnecting the controller for safety during maintenance or repair. However, there are exceptions to this rule. One specific exception addresses controllers with a marked off position that switches all ungrounded conductors. This exception, which is based on the provisions outlined in 430.109, allows for the omission of a separate disconnect within sight of the controller under certain conditions. To understand this exception, it's essential to first define what constitutes a controller and a disconnect, and then examine the conditions under which a controller can serve as its own disconnect. A controller, in this context, is a device or group of devices that serves to govern, in some predetermined manner, the electric power delivered to the motor. This could be a simple on or off switch, a motor starter, or a variable frequency drive. The key function of the controller is to manage the flow of electrical power to the motor. A disconnect, on the other hand, is a device or a group of devices by which the conductors of a circuit can be disconnected from the source of supply. The purpose of a disconnect is to isolate the electrical circuit, thereby providing a safe working environment for personnel. Now let's delve into the exception itself. The exception states that controllers with a marked off position that switches all ungrounded conductors, as covered in 430.109, are not required to have a separate disconnect within sight of the controller. This means that if a controller meets certain criteria, it can serve as both the controller and the disconnect, eliminating the need for an additional disconnect switch. Firstly, the controller must have a clearly marked off position. This off position should be easily identifiable to ensure that personnel can quickly and reliably de-energize the circuit. The marking should be durable and readily visible. Secondly, the controller must switch all ungrounded conductors. In a single-phase system, this would typically mean switching the hot or live wire. In a three-phase system, it would mean switching all three-phase wires. This ensures that the motor is completely isolated from the power source when the controller is in the off position. Thirdly, the controller must comply with 430.109, which outlines the requirements for devices used as disconnecting means. 430.109 specifies the types of devices that are permitted to be used as disconnecting means for motors and motor circuits. These devices must be horsepower rated and suitable for the application. 430.109 addresses general motor applications and states that the disconnecting means shall be a switch rated in horsepower, a circuit breaker, or a molded case switch. The disconnecting means must be capable of interrupting the locked rotor current of the motor. 430.109 specifies the rating requirements for switches. The disconnecting means shall have an ampere rating not less than 115% of the full load current rating of the motor. 430.109 ATWO specifies the rating requirements for an instantaneous trip circuit breaker that is part of a listed combination motor controller shall be permitted to serve as a disconnecting means where the controller is marked. 430.109 A3 specifies the rating requirements for fuses. A fuse shall be permitted to be used as a disconnecting means where the disconnecting means is served by a motor controller that is also served by a fuse. The fuse must be able to interrupt the locked rotor current. 430.109B covers stationary motors of 1 horsepower or less. For stationary motors rated at 1 horsepower or less that are normally left running and are so constructed that they cannot be damaged by overload or failure to start, the branch circuit protective device shall be permitted to serve as the disconnecting means. 430.109C applies to cord and plug connected motors. For cord and plug connected motors, a horsepower rated attachment plug and receptacle shall be permitted to serve as the disconnecting means. A horsepower rated attachment plug and receptacle is suitable for the motor's horsepower rating and is readily accessible. An example of this is a cord and plug connected disposal where the cord and plug is the disconnect for the disposal, and the switch above the countertop is a controller. Thus the exception applies and the switch does not need to have a disconnect in front of it. When applying this exception, it is crucial to ensure that the controller meets all of the specified requirements. if the controller does not have a marked off position, or if it does not switch all ungrounded conductors, or if it does not comply with 430.109, then a separate disconnect within sight of the controller is required. In summary, the exception to 430.102 allows for the omission of a separate disconnect within sight of the controller if the controller has a marked off position, switches all ungrounded conductors, and complies with 430.109. This exception provides flexibility in certain situations while maintaining a reasonable level of safety.